confidential computing is kind of the future. In the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to take up the most pivotal priority in the minds of business leaders.
Hi, welcome to AI Confidential, a show about AI and how to benefit from it responsibly. I'm Aaron Fulkerson, the CEO of Opaque.
And I'm Mark Hinkle, the publisher of the Artificially Intelligent Enterprise.
You're not just the publisher, you're the founding publisher.
I am the founding publisher and sometimes writer, always instigator, Mark Hinkle.
Today we're sharing a conversation with Atin Sanyal, the co-founder and CTO of Galileo. Galileo helps the enterprise monitor, evaluate, and improve generative AI applications. I'm really excited to include them. The reason why I wanted to include them is I think of there's a certain category of company I think of as sister companies to Opaque, and Galileo is one of those. And when I think about them as sister companies, it's because we have shared investors, and then I see them at different events. So I've seen Vikram, the CEO, and Yash at different events for our investors, LPs, and they're just really, really smart, kind people that are really fun to talk to. So Galileo's really been on the forefront of AI evaluation and observability. Some of them spun out. Vikram, I think, is from Google. They were doing early large language model stuff. They were calling it NLP in the beginning, but they've always done this stuff around eval and observability. And they've really come into their own over the last 2 years. They've just been on fire in terms of market penetration and adoption within the large enterprise.
I agree. I think that just this model evaluation is something that is adjacent to things we know like monitoring, but is so different because the technology has changed. Like we're evaluating something that is generative and amorphic and not deterministic, which makes it really hard to keep an eye on.
And as companies increasingly re-architect with agents, it's going to become increasingly valuable and really mission critical.
I agree.
All right, Mark, I always like to have you kick off AI in context because of your job, running probably one of the most popular and most followed, I'm just going to say it, the most popular and most followed newsletter in AI.
Written by me.
You always have great AI in context, and then I just follow you. So you kick off.
So it's all about AI right now, but this is what I find interesting. It's more of a macro trend is, so we had Google Build going, or Microsoft Build and Google I/O, and then you have OpenAI chucking in their news from the cheap seats.
What the heck? Like they stole the press.
Yeah.
Like everybody's making these announcements and OpenAI's like throwing stuff from the peanut gallery that everybody's like, wait, what?
Yeah, exactly. Like they preempt the physical event with a Sam Altman, X post and a media alert, and they're preempting, agentic web. Google is putting out their new Google Glass, which is ironic because I just wrote in my last week's edition of my newsletter about AI wearables, which I'm really interested in. So I think it was timely, but it's just like every single one of these frontiers in AI, everybody is trying to stake their claim, and OpenAI is sort of just like, yeah, you rented out the
running circles around them.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, we're doing classes. We got Johnny Hive. It's we've got this new code agent. You've got a code. You're up to like 12 months ago. Now we've got Codex.
Yeah, and I think that's really the interesting thing is like we could go through the news right now, but by the time we post the news, there's probably new news that takes that out of it's AI in context. It'll be AI out of context because I've never, even in the internet days, and I have enough the early internet days, like when, we first got browsers that worked on the internet, and the web was invented. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm so old. Like I'm like like sitting there talking to my nephews who are 18 and 16 going, yeah, we used to just do texts. And they're like, you mean like on your cell phone? I'm like, well, you would go to this thing and you'd use this thing called Archie, or you would use this thing called Veronica or Jughead. And they're looking at me, and my brother's looking at me. He's a little younger, going, I don't even remember that. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, but every week there would be the point is every week there'd be a new announcement, a new browser, a new search engine. And we were like, wow, this is great. This is like orders of magnitude faster and more impressive.
Yeah, the big AI in context for me is, like you said, Microsoft and Google made some really significant and exciting announcements, but OpenAI's ability to hijack the message and market with their own even more impressive announcements is just incredible. It's like they went point by point for their announcements and one-upped them. So they might want to evaluate how much information they have sharing with OpenAI. Because literally that's what it read like, okay, they got this, we're one-upping with this. They're doing that, we're one-upping with this.
Yeah. I wonder, though, if they just asked ChatGPT how to mess with Microsoft and Google and see if ChatGPT gave them the same strategy that they ran. That would be my question. The summary is that every single one of the big frontier model vendors seems to be announcing stuff in the same place. It's more of a race than it ever than we've seen in the last 20 years in tech. Is everybody's doing the land grab right now, but OpenAI is sort of just running circles because they're doing everything virtually and not physically, which there's a lag. So I mean, they're moving at digital speed, and the other vendors are moving at analog speed, but in reality their bullet train is just going 10 miles faster than Google's and Microsoft's, and that's crazy.
Let's get into the conversation with Atin. He's a really accomplished technologist who's doing really exciting things in industry, helping people unlock the value of AI through evaluation and observability. Let's jump into the conversation. Atin, you're the co-founder and CTO of Galileo. For our listeners who may not be familiar with Galileo, what does Galileo do? Why don't you give us the quick headline?
Firstly, thanks for having me. Big fan of your podcast, so it's great to be here. And Galileo, in one line, is an AI reliability platform specifically designed for Gen AI applications. And we are in the business of helping users build trust in their AI apps. Because as we know, in the modern day of building Gen AI applications, there's a lot of fear around the unpredictability of the systems. And the fear has grown over time, ironically, as the intelligence of these models have gone up. So we help build those disciplined practices around evaluations and observability and guardrailing right from the 0 to 1, the day you start building your application, all the way to the point when you put it into production, and then help you evolve it over time.
That's super helpful. By the way, if the listeners hear the massive swarm of parrots outside, I don't know if you can, but they're all like right outside my window. The San Diego parrot swarm's like outside my office. Thanks for the compliment on the podcast. I just want to shout out to Chain of Thought, your Galileo podcast, which has really exceptional guests, great topics all around AI. Strong recommend for anybody listening. Chain of Thought, also an awesome name for a podcast.
Yeah, I'm sort of sad that we didn't think of it.
It is a good name, I must admit.
So one of the things that your product is used for in terms of a capability set that people are commonly talking about is AI evaluation and AI observability. This is an emerging category. Would you give us your definition of what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think before the ChatGPT moment and before people started building with LLMs, there was this notion of traditional observability and monitoring in applications. And then there was traditional machine learning evaluations. And those were kind of different workflows and almost different personas who would, evaluate machine learning models and observe them in real time. And then there was, just traditional applications, and you would monitor those. We've kind of entered the world where it's a unison of the two, where you have ML systems and ML footprints baked into your application, and then there's traditional software components. So there's elements of um, traditional observability which we know are known to work well, which get employed in the modern systems, except there's a few new parts like using LLMs and using agents to tap into LLMs, especially their intelligence and their reasoning, which leads to certain new class of errors, which in the end affects the performance and quality of your application. So, in the modern day of observability and evals, the whole challenge is to figure out how to quantify and effectively measure the new class of errors which can emerge because of the application of LLMs, but then combine that with some of the fundamental metrics and concepts that you've always known to observe and monitor, like latency, like performance. And the combination of the two is this new category of AI applications.
I come from a background of running cloud infrastructure and even before that, internet service provider infrastructure. And, I still have nightmares of red light, green lights, of is something up or down. Then we got to performance. And, that was, starting to look at quality of service. But what we're really going for in, LLMs is now we're worried about, is it giving biased answers? Is it giving incorrect answers? And it's not a binary up or down, or it's not even a, percent of usage. It's a very, complex thing. As you're building these AI applications, what heuristics do you use to decide if they're working or not? And how can, an evaluation platform, provide that sort of feedback that's actionable?
There's two or three classes of organizations we work with. First, super risk averse, super sensitive, and then there's sort of the modern high tech companies who are more amenable to doing prototypes, etc. But the fear is the same, that I make one small change in some of the either the prompt or the data, and then it leads to a vastly poor output. So the solution to this is, what we realize is, there's no one-stop shop. I think that's the first realization. No one-stop metric which will detect all the errors for you. So you need to provide like a customizable platform which allows a user to author their own metric, because metrics also are, there's quantitative metrics, but there's qualitative metrics also. There's all kinds of, like you mentioned, Mark, there's all these nuanced errors which are hard to objectify and quantify. um, but a platform which allows you to author your own metric and apply it to the different parts of your application, the different parts of your agentic graph, I think that's a platform which I think people are resonating with, because uh, Galileo can provide a platform like Galileo can provide you, state of the art RAG hallucination metric, which detects like generalized hallucinations, but that'll only get you 70% of the way. What you need is kind of a playbook and a workflow to get to that last mile accuracy, and that workflow includes being able to fine tune the metric or instruction tune it so that it adapts to the nuanced data that your application is receiving, but also create your own metric, because the way we define RAG hallucinations might be different from the way you define. So that is where I think we kind of provide you a customizable platform which gives you state of the art metrics as a system of record, but also allows you to evolve them over time and author your own metrics. And together, all of this kind of becomes the playbook for like 360 evals and observability.
So you'll have a customer who does, hey, we're going to test a new AI application. So we're going to run an eval on it. And that eval consists of quantitative metrics around performance in terms of response times and what the overall end user experience is related to the application's performance. And then in addition to that, you guys are providing some baseline qualitative metrics measuring the quality of the responses, probably more generically, right? Maybe you're getting 80% of the way there. And then depending upon the the company, the customer's specific domain, you're providing them with some configuration tools so that they can customize their own qualitative metrics that allow them to provide assessment during the evaluation. And then once they move into production, they've got ongoing monitoring. So my question is, can you walk us through an example, like one of the public customer examples of this is what a good eval looks like and a good monitoring deployment looks like, and use a specific customer? I think people would really that really would be a good way to tell a story.
Absolutely. I'll give a couple of interesting examples from our experience working with some of our customers. I'll refrain from naming the customers, but this is a Fortune 500 enterprise, and they had built, or they are still kind of in the process of building a multi-agentic system where there's basically three components. There's one of the layers is making an API call to a knowledge store, like a knowledge system like Wikipedia, to get some factual information. The second component is something that summarizes it well, and the third is it changes the tone of it. And then the output is a very polished version of, it's a Q&A system, so the output is an answer, but the output is like this polished version of the answer, which sounds very executive. And here there's a bunch of challenges, right? First is some of the more quantitative things you want to measure is whether the API call even worked or not. So measuring API failures. This is something that a traditional observability tool could have potentially, just detected an error 500 because it's a classic API call made. But often what we see is this API call is retrieving documents, and the quality of the documents which are retrieved is almost like a API-based RAG workflow, right? Where you're retrieving documents and then selecting the most relevant portion of the document for summarization. So there, the quality of the retrieval matters a lot. And then at the end of it, something that they cared about was this customized metric called overconfident hallucination. So just to double click into that, there's general hallucination, which is whether the response was factually accurate. But because there's a component in the agentic workflow which changes the tone of it and makes it sound a lot more confident, there's this element of trying to measure something that's incorrect, but it's stated with a certain amount of confidence. So overconfident hallucination was this almost a qualitative metric, I would say, which was built, and they built it using Galileo with a technique that we've created called chain poll, which is an LLMS judge augmentation. We improved the classic LLMS judge and made it more accurate using chain of thought and ensembling, etc. But that's one example where there's no overconfident hallucination out of the box metric that anyone could provide, and it was so specific to their use case. But I'll give you another example. In the same workflow, one of the things that was happening was there was API calling the API again and again in case there was some measurement of low quality retrievals. So in that case, they wanted to measure the number of API calls, which is a very simple metric, which can it's basically a count of the number of calls, but it is a custom metric that an evaluation platform wouldn't think that, oh, that's a metric that any would be used generally. But in this case, just because of the way they had built their agentic workflow, that was very important because they didn't want to, there was LLM calls in the mix, etc., and there was cost considerations. But that metric, as simple as it sounds, it's basically a Python function that just measures the number of calls. It proved pretty pivotal for them because there were many instances where there were almost like an infinite loop of calls which was being made, and that would affect their costs at scale. So these are just examples where there's classic metrics which out of the box you can provide for measuring groundedness and factual correctness and consistency, and many of the open source eval tools do talk about those. But where it truly shines is this ability to create a cohort of customizable metrics and use them together to observe your application end to end. That's where I think really a product like Galileo shines.
Yeah. And so that really is interesting. The sort of you're looking at a life cycle thing, and what is a typical way that a user would want to be alerted for when there's a problem? Like, is there, since it's not a binary thing, it's a qualitative thing. Like, do they hit a threshold and say my LLM has just sold a Chevy or a Cadillac Escalade for $4 on our website, we have a problem? Or is it like over the course of the week, we're seeing that the quality and the hallucination rate is up X%? Like, how would you be alerted that there's a problem? Like, what's the threshold that you see in practice?
Yeah, fundamentally, in order to generate an alert, you need some kind of criteria. And the criteria has to be something that's quantified. Otherwise, it's very difficult to create a condition under which you get alerted. And that's part of our challenge is how do we take some of these qualitative measures and quantify them? For example, one of the papers that we had written, a paper called Chain Poll, which essentially takes LLM as judges. But what it says is that it's okay to use another LLM to determine, the veracity of the other LLM's output. But there's a few things you need to consider. Number one, LLMs are very good at binary outcomes and very poor at scoring. For example, like you can't ask an LLM to score a response between 1 and 10 based on how good they think it is. You usually get a lot of hallucinations. On the other hand, very strict binary yes or no outcomes are much better. So we combined this discovery, and we made this discovery in the early days of ChatGPT, but it was a very important discovery to be made because it really takes this idea that you can use LLMs for yes and no outcomes and combine that with polling, which is you do multiple judges, and there's ways to optimize it in a single call, for engineering purposes, for practicality. But these two concepts together is what Chainpoll is. And what Chainpoll allows you to do is quantify a lot of these qualitative metrics. Just to take that overconfident hallucination, you can write a prompt based metric which defines what overconfident hallucinations would be. But then at the end of it, you want a yes or no outcome, whether the LLM thought that it was overconfidently hallucinating. But it's a metric that you can create through a prompt. And you need to give the user the ability to create these prompt based metrics. And then combine that with this chain poll methodology in Galileo, you get a score of overconfident hallucination between 0 and 1. Usually, if it's high, that means it's bad, and low, it's good. So that's how we are able to quantify a lot of these qualitative metrics. And on top of that, you're able to create a lot of the alerts that, Mark, you're referring to.
So chain poll, you kind of flip the script where rather than having a single assessment qualitatively, you have a series of LLMs through kind of a democratic process. I'm validating this. This is my understanding, so correct me if I'm wrong. So through kind of a democratic process of multiple LLMs evaluating the output, they're scoring it, and then through this consensus building, you're getting a more accurate scoring. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Basically, you nailed it. The one thing I'll add to that, though, is something we've discovered over the few years of having seen chain poll in action. First, it is vastly more accurate than, say, a standard LLMS judge prompt-based metric that you would create out of the box, because we've really fine-tuned the methodology to, have like 90+% accuracy. But even with chain poll, what we've realized is there's often cases where chain poll will yield false positives simply because data changes. And this is where the data aspect of, just generally the importance of data in agentic or LLM based application comes in, um, the whole notion of garbage in, garbage out still holds. Like if you have bad data in your RAG application or RAG store, you will get a bad output no matter what you do. So in those cases, what we've seen is Chainpool yields false positives because the data is changing. And what needs to be done is you want to give the user a low touch way to incorporate human in the loop feedback. And we call it like instruction tuning a Chainpool metric. And what that essentially means is you detect a false positive, you provide a very uh, low verbosity feedback, critical feedback of why. This is a very interesting field because what we've done a lot of internal experiments to see the accuracy changes in Chainpool based on the verbosity of the feedback that you give. And we've published about it. It's a whole very interesting field on how we call them evaluation agents because these evals are adopting or adapting to your data over time. But what we've seen is the quality of the feedback that you give, it improves the metric over time. So it doesn't make the same mistake again. And this is where human in the loop comes in because it's very hard in this LLM era. It's very hard to have these one-stop metrics that will work for all your use case. Errors are often very nuanced and very subjective, like this overconfident. This was one example of many kind of very subjective errors that happen. Um, so you need to give these low touch feedbacks and critiques, and we augment the chain poll prompt with these instructions. But then we have to balance it with the engineering reality of token sizes, and you don't want to overflow them, and there's a lost in the middle phenomenon that DeepMind had talked about, where the bigger the prompt and bigger the context, the accuracy tends to reduce, amortized over time. So all these things need to be. What we've done is we've explored all these things and all these scenarios and built like the newer versions of Chainpool in a way which allows low touch feedback, and it augments the feedback in a way where it's most comprehensible and concise for the LLM to understand where the mistake was, and the mistake is not made over time.
You and your co-founder Vikram were early pioneers with large language models. You initially, because they weren't called large language models, broadly speaking, you guys had an NLP studio, but you guys were very early on. Could you tell us, like, just briefly the origin story? And then I have a question about governance that I want to get to too, but I just want to set up a little bit of background about you and Vikram.
Absolutely. So we are three co-founders. It's me, Vikram, and
Thank you.
Yash. Yeah, no. But my personal background is I spent almost 15 years kind of building a lot of the ML AI infrastructure at places like Uber and Apple during their early growth days. So learned a lot about the importance of observability and evals because this is an era where just modeling and AI is not as pervasive, and certainly deep learning models were not productionizable by any means. But the whole phenomenon of garbage in, garbage out was very true. And I was part of Uber's Michelangelo team, which is a very well known team for having built out end to end AI infrastructure. So we had this test bed of hundreds of models across so many cities that Uber operated in, and all different kinds of very important or like high criticality models like fraud, lifetime value, recommendation systems. So it became a good test bed for me to start seeing the efficacy of better evals leading to better models. That was kind of the origin hypothesis that eval tooling for machine learning is broken. And then we got into the language modeling space because number one, transformers were, this is 2020, so transformers had already been around for a couple of years, and the cost of running a deep learning model was going down year by year. So we kind of saw that unstructured AI will be fairly big in the decade, a decade that's coming. Although we couldn't have predicted exactly the specifics of what happened, but that's why we got into language modeling. And in the early days of like language modeling, which is 2020 to like 2023, before ChatGPT, fine tuning was a very big workflow that people used to do, and training data. And um, we've seen fine tuning kind of come back in some shapes and forms, and love to talk about that and the importance of confidential computing in that area. But the problem of data quality was like this big problem in language modeling in those days. So we had built out these algorithms to, like, evaluation basically meant, hey, can you take my training and eval set and auto detect the data points, or the supervised data points that are bringing my model performance down? And what we did was we said that the best way to detect data and label noise is by observing the training data as it sort of converges to the labels during the training, and we would use statistic to spot anomalies in them. And what we saw was all the ones which had a bunch of anomalies, all the data points were all the incorrectly labeled data and drifted data and noisy data. So that kind of became our big use case, where people would curate, hand curate data and auto label data, and then they would pass it through Galileo, and we would automatically detect the noisy ones and fix them for you and curate high quality training and evals data. Then the workflows changed post ChatGPT, where prompting became a big thing. People started using these third party APIs from OpenAI, Anthropic, and now there's so many inference providers which offer pretty robust open source models. So the workflows changed, and the eval story kind of became, there's certain things that still remain, which is it's still a data garbage in, garbage out problem. So it's a very big data problem. But now there's all these notions of hallucinations and qualitative errors that you want to measure in, to make sure that the output is good. And till 2024, it was basically RAG. So you had one vector store, knowledge store, retrieve, make a call to LLM and make sure that the LLM answers per the data. That has kind of exponentially evolved into not just having a single knowledge store, but all these APIs and multi-agent frameworks where agents are talking to each other through LLMs. And now with MCP, that offers another new like transport layer to be able to host centralized tools. And all this is to say that we've evolved to the point where people are figuring out how to use LLMs, but the traditional software engineering practices have come back to the fore. And now is the time where you don't want to use LLMs just as Q&A, or ask it to do like some fancy language related things. Rather, it's the reasoning of the LLMs that you want to use and tap into to be able to do things that you couldn't do earlier. And the MCP is kind of like just a layer that allows you to automate a lot of the tool choosing and leverage the brain of the LLM to choose the right tools, etc. So that's what brings us to today. And um, that's why I'm like super excited that it's kind of this pivotal point that we're reaching, where applications will start truly using these LLMs. And that, combined with just traditional software building paradigms together, can build like the next layer of like the next version of like software 2.0, which is intelligent software.
Yeah. So I think you brought up two things, and that are both around agents. Is one, we see a lot of discussion with MCP, and I think the other protocol is A to A as the way that agents will be communicating. So you have this problem of monitoring interactions between something that you may probably control. And in the future, the idea is that just like we have human contractors, we may have agent contractors. So you want to make sure that they're exchanging data properly, that they're doing it securely. And then that changes things quite a bit, because usually you've been monitoring observability and evaluation is under things that you control or you're a SaaS customer of. In the future, it almost looks to me almost like intrusion detection, because you got to detect if that's a good acting agent or a bad acting agent. How are you looking at that, as far as, or how should we as people adopting that technology be looking at it?
That's a great question. Intrusion detection certainly makes sense in an era where you have, almost like multiple software components that are able to actually do things, which is what's happening now. The ability for software to do things has increased and improved because of LLMs. Uh, but also, I think one thing that uh, um, rather one workflow that's emerging is that as people start figuring out how to truly tap into the reasoning abilities of these models, the onus or the responsibility of um, just making sure the quality of the end-to-end application is good comes back to the data. Confidentiality, maintaining data sovereignty is going to go up exponentially in the next 2 to 3 years. Uh, LLMs are going to get commoditized because you kind of figure out how to use the reasoning capabilities, and it all comes back to the quality of the data, the confidentiality of the data, and that's where I think um, confidential computing is kind of the future. In the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to take up the most pivotal priority in the minds of business leaders, rather than the ability of the LLMs causing bad outputs, which will reduce exponentially year after year. It's going to be the quality of the data that will cause bad outputs.
Yeah, I'm so glad you plugged confidential AI. We've seen, so you spoke at the Confidential Computing Summit 11 months ago in June, and you called out at the summit last year that using confidential training was going to be increasingly important. We've seen in the last 11 months a massive proliferation of confidential RAG. So we've seen it at Opaque, but you've seen Meta come out with their private message processing for WhatsApp. It's confidential RAG. You've seen Apple come out with private cloud computing. Azure, Google, they're all doing varieties of confidential RAG. And like you said, the data at the prompt level, and then also the data that's flowing in to do retrieval augmentation from enterprise systems, that's intellectual property, any exhaust from that RAG pipeline, perhaps before large language models, may have been inconsequential. But with the incredible capabilities of large language models, that data is it creates a fingerprint that could very easily be weaponized to disrupt a business or damage a business's reputation. So I'm just agreeing with your assessment on confidential computing. We call it confidential AI because it's the application to AI workloads. And more specifically, the thing that we've seen just rapidly proliferate is confidential RAG.
I mean, you're 100% right. There's a reason confidential RAG has become important, is because RAG is basically inference time. How do you use LLMs at inference time? And that is today 80 to 90% of the workflows, right? People are using LLMs as commoditized entities which are hosted somewhere, and I'm going to just tap into it because it's easy, it's low hanging. But there's also training, and I can give you specific examples from our working with Fortune 10 banks and telcos, where confidential data is so critical even for evaluations. I talked about evaluation agents and how the playbook to get to that 99% accuracy. One part of the playbook is actually fine tuning eval models, because without fine tuning there's no way to get to the 5-9 level of accuracy that you need. And that's a pretty critical part of our playbook, especially in cases where data privacy is very critical, and there's a lot of internal knowledge that resides in an organization, and the dependence of the use case on that internal knowledge is very high. What we've seen is we've kind of come to the era where you can start fine tuning smaller language models, SLMs, typically in the 2 to 10 billion parameter range. And if you fine tune it on the right data, it becomes very highly performing, high accuracy metrics, which is what customers want. But there's a price you pay for fine tuning. The first price is, of course, GPU cost, which will come down over time. But the other price is that you're actually using sensitive data for training and fine tuning, which is where confidential computing plays a very pivotal role. because now you have evals which have the access to private data, and now you're going to run this evals at scale for eternity. The probability of you leaking sensitive data if you don't use confidential computing is almost guaranteed. So, just to wanted to add that one point of this new workflow that we are seeing, especially in evals and observability around fine tuning, and this is all going to pick up in the next 3 to 5 years.
We had Sriram, the head of IBM's AI research, on the podcast, and their whole strategy is around small language models and enterprises fine tuning them. The accuracy of these are on par and much more efficient. They can be better because you can train them cheaper. I'm just giving a call back to a previous episode that was really popular. You are speaking at the Confidential Computing Summit on June 16th. The summit is June 16th through the 18th, confidentialcomputingsummit.com, organized and hosted by Opaque. Thank you for joining us again. And you're in a great lineup with Joe from Crew AI and Jake from LangChain and and Mark as well, who will be in that first day session. Thanks for coming out again. And what's your focus on your talk at Summit?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having me. I'm a lot more excited this year. Not to say that I was not excited last year, but the excitement is, manyfold this year, simply because.
No, I get it. Like last year, we were starting, we started to see a little bit of smoke. We had a great lineup. We had the CTO from Accenture, CTO from Microsoft, but this year it's a bonfire.
Yeah, absolutely. I think last year it was, we were still in the early days and people were figuring out RAG, and a lot of it was, to me at least, it felt like a part of it was hypothesis. And there's a lot more to talk about this year, especially having seen the year transpire and new workflows emerge and new frameworks. People have really started adopting not just RAG, but this is the year of agents, and I remember calling that out. And certainly, we've seen that pan out, where just the appetite for starting to build LLM systems that actually do things and work for you, rather than just giving you a linguistically cohesive output. That's the exciting bit, and there's just because there's so much more opportunity to actually start building things that work. Systems have become complex, and evaluations and observability has taken this new, not only a paradigm, but also sort of new level of importance, where I have this interesting sort of survey result that I had seen, where there were two questions which were posed to business leaders. First was their perception in the last 3 years of LLMs becoming more and more intelligent, and that graph kind of goes up because of obvious reasons. I think we all can agree these models have become better. But the second graph was of the confidence in them deploying the applications, and that has gone down simply because we've gone from simplistic architectures now to all these different components that need to work together to actually get something done. But that's the exciting bit, where if you bake in the fundamental practices of traditional observability combined with the new era of LLMs, and this is where a tool like Galileo kind of covers both things, you can really build something that's pretty spectacular and you can do amazing things. So people have figured out a lot in the last 1 year, and there's a lot to talk about. But also, most exciting thing is, I think the next 1 or 2 years, the opportunities of building something at all levels, right from the hobbyist trying to build or vibe code an application, all the way to the big enterprises who are building something on top of supremely confidential data. The possibilities are a lot more real this year and going into next year. So I'll be talking about how do you essentially bake in those practices of good evaluations, observability, as well as guardrailing, and how these three disciplines come together, and when they marry good software engineering and app building practices, you can truly build something that's safe and build something that you can trust.
It's going to be a great event. And if you want to learn how to build reliable AI agents, Atin will be speaking alongside Crew AI on a topic around agents, LangChain. Oh, and the other one was the NVIDIA NeMo team is also giving a talk on the 16th. One of the things you said that I think is really worth spotlighting is as these AI models have increased in their robustness and capability set and ability to reason and make decisions and interact with different systems, the reliability of their output has decreased. And this is a recognized fact. You know, OpenAI, Anthropic, everybody's been talking about this. Like as these models get bigger and bigger and bigger and more powerful, the predictability of them is declining, partly because they're chaining together multiple agent systems. So this is a very timely talk for Atin at Summit. Atin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was really nice talking to you, Mark and Aaron.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, we will see you next month at Confidential Computing Summit, and thanks for your time today. It was exciting to have Galileo on today because, you know, with every single new technology boom, we do stuff and then we figure out if we're doing it right later. And I feel like the, you know, understanding observability and evaluation of AI applications, models, etc., is so important because before, if you didn't understand it, you might have had a security risk, but you didn't have a security risk that could auto scale and automate and wreak havoc all over the place. So it was great to understand what large industry leaders are looking at, from the fact that not only how are these models performing, are they hallucinating, which would be the obvious, but where they're looking in the future, which is the interaction between these agents who are effectively, you know, like having contractors that are going to work back and forth between companies and understanding how those interactions go, how the API calls are. So, I mean, it was a really educational, you know, deeply insightful conversation from someone who's working with people who are really doing, you know, AI at scale.
What I love about Galileo and Atin is that, you know, you and I both are so incredibly passionate about driving human progress through technology. And it's really important that we do that responsibly so that we can manage the second order consequences or the negative externalities. And that's exactly what Galileo is doing. So they pioneered this concept of chain pull for measuring the qualitative effectiveness of AI applications, generative AI applications. They published it on Archive. It's a good paper. Go read it. And their whole purpose is to help people to advance human progress by adopting AI responsibly, which is exactly the mission of Opaque. And it's why I'm really excited to have a conversation with Atin and have them at Summit.
Since your office is in San Francisco, have you heard about the guy who buried the treasure chest in San Francisco?
I heard. I saw the headline. I didn't read the article. And was it It was like a software nerd in San Francisco or something?
I believe so. I think he's probably tied to him, like getting his Twitter or X following up, and 10K is cheaper than that. Is like, I created this one clue, and this one clue is where I buried a chest, and it's 10K. It's 5,000 in gold and 5,000 in something else, and they buried it.
Oh yeah, it was like a Bitcoin wallet too, or something.
Yeah, right? Something to that effect. And so I took the clue and put it in ChatGPT, and I have the answer. And when I come to the Confidential Computing Summit,
you can't have somebody else would have already put it in ChatGPT.
I don't know, man. I am gonna get one of my friends to go rent a metal detector, and I think we need to do a field trip to go see if we can find that chest if it hasn't been found by next month. That is my goal for that. But I have the
All you
chat
have to do is
saved.
you announce across your massive readership that you have the answer, and you're going to live stream it at CC Summit. And to be there, you're going to walk over from CC Summit. So join you at CC Summit.
We
And then
totally,
after
man.
the workshop, they're going to walk over and you're going to dig it up.
Me and you and
You'll have
Owen,
like
the cameraman.
200,000 people.
It will be like the Blair Witch Project, except it's going to be the San Francisco Nerd Project, and you and
No,
I
it'll
are
be,
the nerds.
Who is the Geraldo? It'll be Geraldo's
Oh, yeah.
safe.
Getting the Al Capone safe and like the build up for months. And
There was
then
like
you
a
get
bottle
there.
of ketchup and an empty whiskey bottle.
Yeah, it was so anticlimactic, but yes, that will be us. But I am serious. I will share the ChatGPT chat with you later, and you tell me if the analysis is not impressive. I have to do it with Claude, and I want to do it with DeepSeek. Well, if I do DeepSeek, everybody in China will know where the treasure chest is, but I'm going to try other models and see if they all, triangulate to the same place.
You should absolutely announce this for Summit and have people join you at the workshop.
Yeah, we're definitely.
It'll be a great way to drive folks to the workshop. I'm being serious. I think you should.
I am totally serious. I am so excited about the fact that it could be right. I'm like, it would be cool to find the treasure chest, but just the fact that it was right. Because there was that other guy. I watched the documentary. It's popular on Netflix right now.
I started watching. I haven't watched it all the way through. Forrest Finn.
Yeah, he put the treasure chest out there, and then people started dying. I mean, in San Francisco, you're probably going to just, be out of range of a bar that has Fernet or, Blue Bottle coffee is the danger in finding this chest.
Well, over in the Tenderloin, I see a lot of folks like digging trenches in the bushes, on meth. So
yeah.
You have to fight through those guys.
Yes. Yeah, that's could be it. What would you, if you really wanted to make it hard to find, put it under an encampment somewhere and
put it in that $2 million bathroom in the Tenderloin.
Yes.
If you want to learn more about how to use AI responsibly, check out our website at opaque.co. If you like the podcast, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Please provide us feedback. It's always a delight to hear from our audience, and we really appreciate you listening. This episode of AI Confidential was produced by Wolverton Media Solutions, Places Media, Kodiak's Media, the AIE.net, and Opaque. The music is from my buddy Matt Melamuka, both the title music and the interstitial. I'm Aaron Fulkerson. Thanks so much for tuning in.
And I'm Mark Hinkle. We'll see you next time, and keep in touch by subscribing to my newsletters at theAIE.net, where I can tell you how to use AI for a better life for you and your dog. Take care.